What's up, creators? It's me. It's Adrian Jensen from ProductionCrate.com. I know you love me. I know you missed me. I'm back, baby. I never left. Who are you?
Hey everybody, Chris Kelly here. You asked for it. Today we're going to be showing you how we made our new anime fire effects using Adobe Animate.
Just so you guys know, we are approaching this as two guys who are just a couple of guys.
Just a couple of
who are
dudes.
pretty good in After Effects, but haven't really used Animate before. And since this is primarily an After Effects channel, we're assuming that's what most of you are as well. Neither of us are really traditional artists either, so what I'm saying is if we can do this, you can probably do this too.
This is our first Adobe Animate tutorial, so we want to make sure that we cover every conceivable step in the process that we found valuable. So this is kind of a beginner tutorial, but it's also very, very dense. If you're looking into jumping into Adobe Animate, this is the place to start because it's really going to help you decide whether it's something you want to do or not. We strongly recommend that you use a tablet when using Adobe Animate. Trying to do this with a mouse is going to be a very stressful and unhappy experience.
Bro, they're too fuzzy. They're always biting.
Yep, you try and get the hairless mice and God, they feel weird.
Just uncomfortable.
Yeah, just don't. If you want to know specifically which tablet we're using the Huion Insproi model H1161. They did send this to us for free, but this video is not an ad. We really, really do like this tablet. We have used much worse ones in the past, and this one does exactly what we wanted to do. Thank you, Huion.
Would recommend.
Smooches.
So there's these buttons on the side that can be mapped to different commands using the Huion software. Hovering over any tool is going to tell you what the shortcut for that tool is.
Speaking of sweet gear and really good timing, a few days ago, Atum Tech sent us this really awesome dual-armed swiveling monitor stand, which is perfect because it actually freed up a ton of space on Adrian's desk for the tablet. This thing is really solid and really strong and has tons of freedom of movement, so we can make these monitors spin around and position them exactly how we want to. Now, obviously, you don't need a fancy monitor stand to do this effect, but it was very cramped before with our keyboard and the mouse and the tablet on there, so it was nice to free up all that room. The crew over at Atum Tech gave us this discount code as well for the creators to use. That's you. So if you want to pick one of these up, use the code CRATE20 for 20% off.
When you first open Adobe Animate, you can select a preset to create a new document. We're going with 4K, baby! Huge! You don't have to pick that one if you don't think it's necessary, but we did because we want our animations to be crisp.
Your layout is most definitely going to look different from ours. That's because the UI is completely customizable. If you click Window Workspaces, you're going to see some presets right here. Our layout is based off of the Animator preset. From there, you can drag the windows to locations that you are the most comfortable with.
For example, we're moving our swatches window into its own slot to make it more easily accessible, and I'm also making my toolbar vertical. I guess it reminds me of Photoshop. I don't know. By clicking these three dots, you can see more tools that are not on the toolbar currently, but you do have the option to put them there so you can use them. If we do use any tool that you don't actually see, that's where you can find it.
You're most likely going to want to work from some kind of reference. You can animate a ball if you want to use it as a guide. You can also import some footage if you're planning on mixing some cartoon effects with live action, and something like that could be your reference. Since we're After Effects boys through and through, we just made a quick animation within After Effects. That way we can get our eases to look super buttery smooth. You don't need to do that, but if you decide to, you'll need to import it into Adobe Animate.
If your reference is an image sequence, hit File, Import to Stage, and then select the first frame and click Open, and it will ask you, hey, you want to import all the frames? Of course you do! They're going to take a second to load, but now you've got each frame of the sequence represented as a keyframe in your timeline, and if you choose to do so, you can manipulate them individually.
If your reference is an MP4, hit File, Import Video, and select Embed H.264 Video within your timeline. This will similarly import your video, but instead of individual keyframes, you only get the one, and you can manipulate it as a whole thing.
All right, so now that the reference is imported, it's hecka zoomed in right now, and that's just because we're working in 4K, huge, crispy. So let's change this thing to fit to window, and we can just real quickly verify that everything is working properly. Looks great.
Yeah, confirmed.
Thank you.
Now we want to do all of our actual animation on a separate layer. If we click this suspiciously lock-shaped button, it will actually lock the layer.
What? Weird.
Very strange. We can also pretend to be organized for the internet's sake. Don't look at our office here. And rename this layer to background. Now let's click this plus sign button to create a new layer. This layer is for our sketch, and this is the layer we want to start drawing on.
If we try and draw something right now, you can see that this beautiful piece of art that we made just stays right here as we scroll through the timeline, which is great because we did work really hard on it. But if you think about it, it's not really what animation is all about. You know, it moves. So let's just undo that. As painful as it is, let's undo it, okay?
We're going to highlight all these frames, and we're going to right click and select convert to frame by frame animation. Keyframe every other frame. Now when we draw some beautiful art, it only lasts for 2 frames, which is closer to what we want.
It's a shame, but it's what we need right now. We're gonna start by animating every other frame. This is called animating on twos, and it is actually the most common way to animate stuff. Most animated TV shows are gonna be animated on twos.
Cool.
We're just doing it here to save some time while we get the motion down and we get this the shape looking how we want it.
For sketching, we like to use this brush right here, which is called the classic brush. It's just a basic brush that doesn't really do anything fancy, unlike me and my dance moves. We also want to direct your attention to this button right down here that looks like a target with a pen on it. This is the use pressure button. If we try to draw without it, we get a line that is very consistent all the way through, but if we turn it on, we can get a much more natural looking line that varies in thickness depending on how hard you push on the tablet. And if you're not using a tablet, this is going to do nothing, but we definitely don't recommend using this with a mouse. You're not in for a good time if you use a mouse or any other rodent.
There is another brush called the Fluid Brush Tool, which has some nice tapering built into it. It's nice. We're not really going to be using this today, but you can if you want. We use this a lot when we were animating lightning. It's just a different option that's there if you want it. It's also a lot of fun, so before you start animating for real, just play with it for a little bit.
Yeah,
you know?
It makes you feel talented.
It's true.
And like your hand isn't shaky.
It's nice.
Since this is going to be a rough sketch, we're going to turn the thickness of the brush up. We're just going to try to get down the general shape and motion. We don't want to get bogged down with the details at this stage.
We also want to change it to a color that has basically nothing to do with fire. If you're used to drawing on paper, you might want to pick a gray if that reminds you of a pencil, or a blue if you're a fancy drawer that uses construction pencils. We're going to go with this garish pinkish purple. It's ugly, but whatever. Just pick whatever color you want. Not orange though.
Not orange. Starting with our first frame, we can zoom in on the ball that's in our reference and draw a shape that's not a perfect circle, something irregular.
Now we can skip forward 2 frames to our next keyframe, and our drawing has disappeared. Oh no, just kidding, it's fine. We still want to be able to see it so we can reference it though, and that's where our onion skin comes in. Chris, what the heck is that?
It's right up here. This is the onion skin button. It looks like 2 circles and we can click on it to turn it on. Next to our playhead, it's going to give us some new controls that we can use to control the range. For example, if we move all the way to the end of our timeline and pull this one back, we can still see the first frame. So these controls basically control how many frames in the past or in the future that you can see. We really only need to see 1 or 2 frames at a time, but since we are animating on 2s right now, what we're going to do is pull it back to see 4 frames, and we really don't need to see the future frames at all right now, although this can be useful sometimes.
If we right click on that onion skin button and choose advanced settings, we can change things like the opacity and the color overlay of the onion skin, and that way you can pick colors that contrast with whatever color you're drawing with, and that might make things easier to see.
All right, now we just go ahead and draw our next frame. Just feel it out, make it fiery. You can make it round or pointy at the front, and then on the sides, what we're going to do is just want to add a lot of different flame shapes popping off. We find that it's best not to think about it too much, just kind of do it. Feel it out, do what feels right. We can use the paint bucket tool to fill this in.
Let's jump to our next keyframe, and thanks to the onion skin, we can still see our previous frames. Nice. Let's take a closer look at the details. Each of these flame licks that we drew has its own momentum and is capable of doing its own thing. You can think about them like that if you want. In instead of one giant flame, it could be several small flames that just happen to merge together into a big flame when they're close by, like the Power Rangers. I'm going to bring that up every chance I get. But they can break off at any time and do their own thing whenever they want. Just keep that in mind. Generally, though, they should keep moving forward, but because of drag, they shouldn't be moving as fast as the main fireball. But you do want to keep them moving forward and not shooting backwards.
True. Let's take this big flame as a good example. It's still moving forward, but not as much as the main fireball. So we can redraw it like this. This one in front of it is moving forward as well. We want most of these major details to still be present in the next frame, but don't just copy them the exact same. If you do, it's just going to look like your fire is sliding across the screen and not moving organically, like the Power Rangers.
True. After you draw something, you can totally manipulate it afterwards. You can move these and rotate them. You could even right click on one and find transform and hit either free transform or distort.
And distort is actually really great. It's kind of like a better version of the corner pin in After Effects, and we're using it all the time on these Fire effects. This is the joy of working digitally. If your first drawing only looks okay, you can distort it until you get exactly what you want.
Once again, be mindful of the previous frames, but don't overthink it. Once we're done with those details from the previous frame, we can now trace over the ball reference at the front, adding new details to it as we go.
So at this point, our onion skin is getting super muddy and it's really hard to tell what's going on. If this happens to you, feel free to experiment with different colors and opacity levels. You'll probably have to change this as you go depending on how detailed your stuff is and what color you are using.
We're gonna start letting some of our flames near the back break off now. Like we said, they can break off at any time. We don't want them all to break off at the same time though, because that's not gonna look natural. It's gonna look ridiculous.
Also, keep in mind that with each subsequent frame, these flames should be slowing down and not speeding up. They should also be shrinking down, and you can animate them tumbling around a little bit if you like they're getting caught in some type of turbulent field.
Sometimes the paint bucket is not going to want to fill your shapes in, and that's probably because you have gaps.
No!
Which you might not even be able to locate. It might be frustrating.
It's super frustrating. I hate it so much.
There is an option down here where you can just tell the paint bucket to close the gaps for you, but be aware that using this might cause the paint bucket to cut off some details that you don't want it to. It's not very smart. It doesn't really matter right now in the sketching stage, but it's something you're going to want to watch out for later. We'll bring it up again.
Turning off the reference and the onion skin, you will be able to see exactly what the sketch animation looks like, and I'm happy to say it looks nothing like fire. But we can verify that this is the general shape that we want and that we like the timing of it, and if we didn't, right now would be a great time to fix it, but since we like it, we're going to move on. So let's lock this layer and create a new one with a keyframe every other frame just like before.
At this point, we would like to switch to the paintbrush tool as opposed to the classic brush tool, which is the one that we've been using. This one just has some other options that we're going to go over in a second. All right, so tight. It also draws using the stroke color as opposed to the fill, which is what the paintbrush tool was doing. So we're going to want to change that stroke color to something else that doesn't have the same color as your sketch, but also doesn't have the same color as fire. We're going to use black outlines for now, but whatever color you pick, it doesn't matter because we're going to get rid of those outlines later.
We can also change the style of this brush. Picking straighten is going to make your angles super jagged, which might be kind of cool if you're going for like a really stylized look, or if you're drawing lightning or something like that, this is a good option. Smooth, on the other hand, is the opposite. It's going to make your strokes very clean, very smooth, if you will, just like my favorite scotch. I don't drink scotch. I don't even know what scotch is.
I eat butterscotch.
Ooh, yes.
For this part, we actually want our pressure sensitivity turned off, and we're having our stroke size set down at 1. If we had our pressure sensitivity on, our line would end up with holes in it, and we wouldn't be able to fill them in. Turn it off! Do as I say.
Now we just want to zoom way in and trace over our sketch by adding lots of fiery detail. That's just a cool, or should I say warm, way of saying that we're going to trace over it super duper squiggly like.
If we turn our onion skin back on, you'll see that it shows us the previous frame on the outlines layer, but not on the sketch layer. And that's because the sketch layer is locked. But if we unlock it, we actually can see it now, but we don't actually need that for this step. So we're going to relock it, and that's going to make everything easier to see. It's going to be a little bit less jumbled and complicated. And now we can go through the entire timeline, adding scribbling our nice details. Scribble, scribble, scribble.
Doing this stuff is a great time to listen to some music and some podcasts. Make sure to check out the Creators channel where we have our very own podcast. And if you prefer music, let us know what music you're listening to in the comments below, because I'm looking for some new channels on Spotify and I'm curious to know what y'all listening to. You don't need to follow the sketch exactly. If you notice problems or other things you don't really like, you can correct them at this stage. The sketch is but a guide. It is not the law. I'll be your lawyer today.
You might notice that sometimes you draw a lot of detail and the smoothing action of the brush just kills it, ruins it.
Hey, easy. We're doing a tutorial.
Oh, is that what this is? If that's the case, you could just turn the smoothing down. It's not a big deal. Or you could even just switch to ink mode, and that's what I'm gonna do. This is more true to how you actually draw the lines, and this way you can add as much detail as you want. In our case, we don't necessarily need a lot of smoothing, and that's because we're working in 4K, huge, and we're zoomed in a lot. So we already actually have quite a decent level of control, so we don't really need that smoothing, but it just depends on what kind of style you're going for. If you think keeping the scribbles in looks sloppy, then just do it smooth, you know?
Yeah.
But we like it. We like
Yeah.
the detail. It looks hand-drawn, and these are supposed to be hand-drawn.
Exactly. I hate when some people say like, oh, we got these cool hand-drawn effects, and it's like, that's just straight up digital. That's not hand-drawn. We like the digital and we like the hand-drawn. There's a place for both, and okay, I'm getting too fired up. Here's what our outline looks like. They're pretty good, I gotta say.
Great job!
Just so you know, if you wanted to make any big changes to this, you can do it with this button right up top next to the onion skin called Edit Multiple Frames. It has range controls just like the onion skin, but it actually allows you to edit all the frames at once.
Yeah, so we could move it over if it's not centered properly, or we could shrink it down if we accidentally drew it too big and at the end we realize we need more space, or we could even skew it and transform it around. It's not something that we need to do right now because ours is perfect, but the option's available to you if you need it, if you're not as perfect as we are.
Yeah,
it's
a lot to ask. It's time to fill it in with color, so we're gonna pick a nice medium orange and just go for it. Remember the gap closing options? You'll probably need them because there's usually some gaps that you just can't see, especially in complicated shapes like these, and like we warned you before, this might cause the paint bucket to cut off some of your details, so just be on the lookout for that.
The paint bucket is just finicky, man. Yeah. Sometimes you need to click a whole bunch of times to get it to work, and other times it just never works. If it refuses to work, a method that we came up with is to just take the line tool and draw a bunch of lines through your shape, and that divides it into smaller shapes, which will either be easier to fill in, and then the one that doesn't work, that'll be where the gap is, or sometimes they'll all work and then it'll just work and there was never a gap at all, in which case, why don't you just fill it in the first place? Paintbrush tool makes no sense to me, makes no sense to Chris either.
All right, here's our flame filled in. There's lines through it, but that don't matter. Let's turn back on Edit Multiple Frames, make sure the range is covering the entire animation, and hit Control A to select everything. And now we can change the stroke color to none, which actually just makes the outlines disappear, leaving us with a clean orange flame animation.
Hey, that's pretty nice. We could be done here if we were lazy.
Well, we kind of are.
Anyway, later, creators. Just kidding. We want to make it a bit smoother, and we can draw some in-between frames. To do that, hold Control and highlight every frame that isn't a keyframe. By the way, the keyframes are going to have a black dot on them, and the ones without the black dot, those are not keyframes. The blank keyframes have a clear dot on them. Anyway, highlight those, right-click, and select Convert to Blank Keyframe. See what I mean? Now we have a strobing fire animation, which would be sweet if it was lightning, but hey, creators, it's Adrian. Welcome to the animating lightning tutorial.
Oh, got me off guard.
Just kidding.
But if you do want to learn how to make lightning, let us know in the comments below. All right, back to fire. Let's turn on the onion skin and change the view area so that we can see one frame in the past and one frame in the future. Now this stage is called in-betweening because we're literally just gonna draw in between our existing frames. We're making new frames that bridge the gap between the frames that we already have, and once those outlines are done, we'll fill them in orange and get rid of the outlines just like before. Now our animation is super smooth, super buttery, and it's looking super great.
It is for now. We're about to ruin it again.
What?
Lock the layer!
Oh.
Create a new layer! Highlight all the frames on that layer and convert them into blank keyframes. We're going to use this layer to add some shading. That's right, we're going to add some shading as if there's a light coming from the upper left shining down onto the fire, causing a shadow on the bottom right side.
That actually doesn't make any sense.
I don't care! Okay, you're right. Typically, fire is its own light source. If this really bothers you, you could just shade the whole outside and have the brighter parts on the inside. In my opinion, that doesn't look quite as good, quite as dynamic. You know, this isn't real fire, it's cartoon fire. But if you disagree with me, it's fine. It's gonna bother me, but it's fine. Do your own thing.
Let's change our fill color to this darker orange, more of a red orange, not to be confused with red orange.
Whoa.
Wow.
Look at him go.
We'll never bring red orange back. Just so you know, that is the last you'll ever see of red orange.
So we're gonna draw our shadow in this very flamey and spiky way. That's the name of the game, guys. Flamey and spiky all day. But we don't need to follow the edge perfectly. We're just gonna draw this big fat shape around it. We're gonna mask it off later, so it's cool. My mom says it's cool. You can use the onion skin during this stage if you find it helpful.
We don't just want to shade the bottom, we also want to shade the undersides of any of the flames that are overhanging like this. And let's go through and do this for every frame. So
animating shadow, it doesn't make sense. All right, so now that we have those shadows in place, they look awful.
Yeah.
But we could fix it maybe. I hope.
Once again, we're going to edit multiple frames. Make sure they are all included. Control-8 to select everything and get rid of the stroke.
Get out of here. See you never. Now turn off edit multiple frames and stop doing that accent and duplicate the main flame layer, the orange one. Move it to the top, right-click it again, and select mask.
That's going to cause the shadow layer to use it as an alpha matte.
No, he did it! Alpha matte! They said he couldn't do it. They said he couldn't do it in a tutorial that was not After Effects, but he can. You'll notice that both our shadow layer and our mask layer are locked now. They need to stay locked in order for the alpha matte. They said it couldn't be done to work. If you unlock one of them, it breaks. You can unlock them if you need to make changes, but make sure to relock them when you are done. But now, if we play through this, you can see that the fire is nice and shaded and it looks good again. Shall we ruin it for a third time? No! Okay.
We would like to add some highlights though. This is pretty much the same process as the shadows, except we want to keep the highlights towards the front of the fireball because that's where the hottest part of the fireball is. We're gonna color these a pale yellow. We also are choosing not to use a mask on these. If they break the outline a little bit, that's fine. If they go over the shading a bit, that's fine too. When we're done, we get rid of the outlines, and you know how to do that because we taught you before.
You remember earlier? All right, we're looking pretty good now, and I'd say that we're ready for an export. Hit File, Export, Export Movie. We're gonna wanna make a special folder for these because we're gonna export it as a PNG sequence.
Since we truly are After Effects boys,
AE for life.
We're gonna bring this into After Effects for some finishing touches. And these can be whatever you want them to be. One cool idea is to make a new solid with a gradient ramp on it and give it an overlay transfer mode and hit the preserve underlying transparency switch.
Or maybe you could also add a little bit of blur to it and some grain, and that might make it look like it was hand animated traditionally and then scanned.
Or we can use a curves or a levels and fine tune the colors to make them a bit nicer. We can use a pixel motion blur or real smart motion blur if we want to add a little bit of motion blur, you guessed it. And of course, we can add some freaking glow.
Of course we can, it's fire after all. If you're going for more of a magic effect, you can mess with the colors, make it green or something, whatever you want.
This exact effect that we just made is going to be available on FootageCrate as FootageCrate 4K Anime Fireball 2. There's also a bunch of other anime fire effects that were all made in this exact same way. And if you take anything away from this, hopefully that it's making these kinds of effects isn't as hard as it seems. You can do it, and we want to see you give it a try.
We believe in you.
Yeah, you can always use stock effects combined with your own custom effects. Adrian and I were just talking about making a short anime style video at some point.
Oh my gosh, do you guys want to see that?
Yeah, so if you want that, let us know. And if you want more Adobe anime tutorials, let us know, and we could skip over a lot of the setup process and just jump into the fun.
Tell us what you want us to animate and what you want to see us animate. The same, it's pretty much, yeah. I mean it in two different ways, but it's pretty much the same.
Right.
Let us know.
Later, creators.
Later, creators. Perfect.